April 2025. 26 civilians die in Pahalgam, Kashmir. Within 72 hours, India launches Operation Sindoor. Missiles rain on Pakistani military sites. Pakistan retaliates. Indian air bases hit. Pakistani installations struck back. For 3 days, two nuclear-armed nations exchange fire across multiple fronts. Then both sides step back from the edge. No winner declared. No territory changed hands. Just a demonstration that escalation happens faster than anyone can control it. 114 aircraft in the sky during a single engagement. 72 Indian, 42 Pakistani. The largest beyond visual range dogfight in South Asian history, and buried in the operational reports was something most analysts missed. Pakistan's Chinese-supplied J-10 fighters performed better than expected. Conservative assessments confirmed at least 2 French Rafale jets went down, the first combat loss of a Rafale anywhere on Earth. This wasn't just India versus Pakistan. This was the first real test of integrated Chinese military hardware against Western systems in modern combat, and the Chinese package held up. Here's what that means. Pakistan now operates almost entirely on Chinese weapons, Chinese data networks, Chinese intelligence sharing. During Sindoor, Beijing fed real-time satellite intelligence to Islamabad while publicly calling for restraint. China didn't intervene directly. It didn't need to. The embedded architecture did the work. Pakistan's readiness during the crisis wasn't just Pakistani, it was Sino-Pakistani. And that changes India's entire calculation about what a conflict with Pakistan actually involves. Now layer in the speed problem. In modern South Asian crises, velocity matters more than firepower. How fast you assign blame, how fast you authorize strikes, how fast you establish the narrative before diplomats even pick up the phone. India demonstrated military competence during Sindoor, but by the time its operations concluded, the diplomatic positions had already hardened. Third-party assessments were set. The window for shaping the international response had closed. India's crisis response framework was built for a different era: calibrated escalation over days, measured retaliation with time for back-channel communication. That architecture assumed you had 48 to 72 hours to manage a crisis before it became uncontrollable. The new reality is 24 hours, maybe less. Social media amplifies everything instantly. Adversaries coordinate in real time. Great powers position themselves within hours, not days. Political outcomes get decided before the shooting even stops. This mismatch between India's institutional tempo and the actual pace of conflict is a structural vulnerability, and adversaries are learning to exploit it. But Sindoor revealed something else. India will use force when threatened, not as a last resort after months of diplomacy. Immediately. The gap between terrorist attack and missile launch was 3 days. That's the new baseline, and it terrifies everyone paying attention because 3 days is not enough time for miscalculation to get corrected. The Council on Foreign Relations listed an India-Pakistan clash as a top-tier global risk for 2026. Their assessment is blunt. Another terrorist incident traced to Pakistan-based groups could trigger immediate retaliation. Domestic political pressure in both countries makes restraint harder. Military modernization on both sides increases the damage each exchange inflicts. Limited trust means every move gets interpreted as the worst-case scenario. And then there's the water. Kashmir isn't just a territorial dispute. It's Pakistan's water source. The Indus, Jhelum, and Chenab rivers flow from Indian-controlled territory into Pakistan. 80 million Pakistani farmers depend on that water. After Pahalgam, India suspended the Indus Waters Treaty. Not abrogated, suspended. The message was clear. India can turn off Pakistan's irrigation whenever it wants. Pakistani officials have stated publicly that any move to permanently restrict water flow would be considered an act of war. So now you have 2 nuclear powers where one terrorist attack can trigger missile strikes within 72 hours, and one of those powers controls the other's water supply. That's not a stable equilibrium, that's a countdown. But Pakistan isn't even India's primary threat anymore. That distinction belongs to China. June 2020, Galwan Valley, Ladakh. 20 Indian soldiers killed in hand-to-hand combat with Chinese troops. Clubs, stones, no firearms. 4 Chinese soldiers dead. It was the first deadly clash on the India-China border in 45 years, and it shattered the assumption that both sides had learned to manage their disputes without bloodshed. The border dispute itself traces back to British colonial mapmaking. The McMahon Line in the east was never accepted by China. Aksai Chin in the west has been controlled by China since 1962. Neither side recognizes the other's claims. There is no mutually agreed boundary, just a line of actual control that both armies interpret differently, leading to regular confrontations. Doklam in 2017. Galwan in 2020, Tawang in 2022. Each incident follows the same pattern. Chinese troops cross into areas India considers its territory. Indian forces respond. Both sides mass troops. Standoffs last weeks or months. Eventually they disengage, but nothing gets resolved. The boundary remains disputed. The next transgression is just a matter of time. China isn't going to invade India tomorrow, but it doesn't need to. What China is doing is more insidious, incrementally shifting the line of actual control through sustained pressure. Build a road 5 kilometers into disputed territory. India protests. China ignores it. The road stays. Next year, build another road 5 kilometers further. Repeat. Over a decade, you've moved the de facto border 50 kilometers without firing a shot. India's response has been to match infrastructure development along the border. Roads, airstrips, forward operating bases. The problem is China builds faster. In 2020, China completed 3,700 kilometers of border roads. India completed 1,200. The gap isn't just in speed, it's in capacity. China's state-run construction firms can mobilize resources India's private contractors can't match. And beneath the infrastructure competition is a darker reality. China views India as the primary obstacle to its dominance in Asia, not Japan, which is a US ally locked into a security treaty, not South Korea, which hosts American troops. India, the only large Asian democracy with an independent foreign policy, a growing economy, and the military capability to resist Chinese pressure. If China can keep India focused on its northern border, Pakistan pinned on its western border, and internal challenges like the situation in Bangladesh destabilizing its eastern flank, then India never becomes the counterweight to Chinese power that Washington hopes for. India gets contained without a war, and containment is cheaper than conflict. But here's where ignoring India becomes dangerous. When you're surrounded by hostile or unstable neighbors, and great powers treat your concerns as secondary priorities, you stop waiting for permission. You act unilaterally, and unilateral action by a country with 1.4 billion people and nuclear weapons creates the exact crises everyone wanted to avoid. India isn't asking to be the center of attention. It's demanding that its security interests get treated as seriously as everyone else's. When that doesn't happen, the response isn't diplomatic protest. It's Operation Sindoor, it's suspension of water treaties, it's aircraft carriers off Karachi. India has spent 70 years being told to be patient, to compromise, to accept solutions designed by powers that don't live with the consequences. That era is over. India is now the world's 5th largest economy, 4th largest military, most populous nation. It chairs BRICS in 2026, giving it a platform to shape the agenda of a bloc that represents 45% of the global population. India isn't a swing state anymore. It's the pivot point, and pivot points don't get ignored. They get managed carefully, or they become the fulcrum that tips the entire structure into chaos. The economics tell a story that naval analysts alone miss. When India suspended the Indus Waters Treaty in May 2025, it wasn't just diplomatic theater. Pakistan's agriculture depends on rivers flowing from Indian Kashmir. The Indus, Jhelum, and Chenab irrigate 90% of Pakistan's farmland. Islamabad has stated explicitly that any infrastructure blocking those flows would be considered an act of war. India didn't build dams overnight. It didn't need to. The threat alone shifted the calculus. Water became a weapon without a single valve being turned. Economic coercion works both ways. China is India's largest trading partner, $118 billion in bilateral commerce in 2024. India imports 65% of its active pharmaceutical ingredients from China. Electronic components, telecom equipment, industrial machinery, all sourced through Chinese supply chains. In a protracted conflict, India's pharmaceutical sector collapses in 6 months. Manufacturing stalls in 3. China knows this. India knows China knows. The economic interdependence that was supposed to prevent war now guarantees that when war comes, it will be faster and more brutal because both sides understand the clock is ticking. This is where velocity becomes the decisive factor. Modern South Asian crises don't escalate over weeks. They explode in hours. Operation Sindoor demonstrated this with terrifying clarity. 26 civilians killed in Pahalgam on April 24th. India launched retaliatory strikes on May 7th, 13 days. But the aerial battle happened within hours of the first missile launch. More than 114 aircraft in the sky, 72 Indian, 42 Pakistani. The largest beyond visual range engagement in South Asian history unfolded before diplomatic channels even opened. Here's what changed. Attribution used to take days. Intelligence agencies needed to confirm who fired, from where, using what. That delay gave diplomats time to intervene. Now, satellite imagery, signals intelligence, and AI-assisted analysis provide near-instant attribution. India knew within minutes where the Pahalgam attackers came from. Pakistan knew India knew. The old buffer of uncertainty that allowed both sides to step back disappeared. Operational tempo accelerated alongside attribution. In 1999, during Kargil, India mobilized over 3 weeks. In 2025, the first Indian missile was in the air within hours of the decision. Pakistan's response came faster. The entire crisis compressed into a 72-hour window where both nuclear-armed militaries were operating at maximum intensity with minimal oversight. The institutional architecture designed for slow escalation couldn't keep up. But the most dangerous shift happened in the information space. Within 6 hours of the first strike, the narrative was locked. Indian media framed it as legitimate retaliation. Pakistani media called it unprovoked aggression. International opinion crystallized before diplomats could brief their capitals. By the time the UN Security Council convened, positions were entrenched. The outcome wasn't determined by military success. It was determined by who controlled the story in the first 12 hours. China provided Pakistan with real-time intelligence during Sindoor, satellite tracking of Indian air movements, electronic warfare support, data fusion that turned Pakistan's Chinese-made J-10 fighters into a networked combat system. 2 Rafale jets went down, first combat losses of that aircraft anywhere in the world. Pakistan didn't win because its pilots were better. It won specific engagements because China's integrated architecture gave it an information advantage India couldn't match in real time. Beijing's role stayed just below the threshold of direct intervention. No Chinese personnel in Pakistani cockpits, no Chinese missiles fired, but intelligence sharing, network integration, and diplomatic cover at the UN, China demonstrated that it can tilt South Asian conflicts without deploying a single soldier. That's a more sustainable form of influence than occupation, and it's nearly impossible to deter. India doesn't get the luxury of being ignored anymore. The world's 5th largest economy, 4th largest military, most populous nation, now chairs BRICS and commands the ocean carrying its name. Dismissing India's interests doesn't prevent conflict. It guarantees miscalculation. And when miscalculation involves 3 nuclear powers operating in the same waters with no rules to prevent escalation, ignoring India isn't just strategic negligence, it's the spark that starts the war nobody saw coming.